We have just about made it through summer, everybody. SEC Media Days has arrived, and Auburn has made their appearance at the annual event. Let's take a look at what Coach Bryan Harsin said at his press conference at SEC Media Days and take our interpretations away from it. But before we do that, I want to welcome you back to the channel. Whether you're a member of the Auburn family or a fan of another persuasion, this is the E2C network where we cover the whole of the Auburn experience. We may tend to be Auburn sports heavy here, but if it's orange and blue, it is what we do. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the content. And thank you to members of our booster club like Linda Bird, who help produce videos like this. I know you've all had a countdown going for this event basically since college football ended back in January. SEC Media Days is the time where we kind of sit back, take in finally some, at least on the surface, substantive information about Auburn specifically, but the SEC football teams as well. And we've had a lot of things go throughout this week as Auburn was one of the last teams on the final day of the SEC Media Days events to take place, to have their interviews, to have questions asked to them. And so finally, we've gotten to take a look at the press conference with Coach Bryan Harsin. So I want to give you some initial thoughts about the questions that were asked, my interpretations of the answers that were given, just an overview in case you were not able to watch it or if you weren't able to check in on what was said and what was asked of Coach Bryan Harsin. And I always think it's important to remind you of this, that it's good to go and watch it in full context so you can actually hear what was said, because these are just going to be my interpretations of what was said, but I think you can take away the gist of what was going on by what we'll talk about here on this video. And there's also plenty of other interviews and other things done after that initial press conference that were going on with the players like Tank Bigsby, Derek Hall, and John Samuel Shanker. So go check those out as well. But we are specifically addressing the main press conference on the main podium with Coach Bryan Harsin for SEC Media Days. As always, they're welcomed and introduced by Commissioner Greg Sankey, who they seem to have a pretty good relationship and a connection with cars. If you didn't know that, Coach Bryan Harsin is a big car guy, likes to restore cars, and is apparently doing one. That's what they talked about, him and Greg Sankey at the beginning of that. Also pointed out his podcast, an innovative way for Coach Harsin to not only reach us as fans, but potentially recruits as well. His podcast, Huddle with Hars. They talked about that in the opening comments. Speaking of opening comments, a lot of people are talking about Coach Harsin's opening statements. Very short and sweet and to the point. Not to the level of Mike Leach, to be honest with you, but the most important thing is that he openly addressed and said, we all know what happened in the controversy of this offseason in the winter, and I'm done talking about it. If you want more information, go check it out online because it's all there if you want to go into that type of stuff. Basically, it didn't work, and I'm done with it. So we've got about 12 questions. Some of these are two-parters, so we'll tackle those together. We'll start with question number one, and that was around the concept of self-evaluation for just obviously Coach Harsin, but overall as well. A lot of coach speak here. You would expect him to say some of the things that we have, that it's important for us all to self-evaluate, but it goes into obviously for himself, his staff, and his team. And I think you see the fruits of a lot of that self-evaluation from year one, because we all saw it, warts and all. The changes in staff, personnel that's not here anymore, players that are not here anymore, switching people around at certain positions. You self-evaluate every single year, and the fruits of that are seen in what's been going on during the offseason. Question number two, and I always ask this type of question for media events because I feel like the media members get together. It's like, all right, who's gonna ask the fun question to try to get them warmed up, to try to get them to open up a little bit more, and this was it. He was asked the question, is it harder to rebuild a car, as we talked about earlier, he's a car guy, or rebuild a team? We all know, well, I shouldn't say we all know the answer to that because I've never rebuilt a car myself. And it's not really that much of a correlation that you can make there, two very completely different things. But the thing that I take away from this, and what it reminds me of with this question, and Coach Harsin talked about, is that he's had to not only rebuild from a different regime altogether, but he's had to rebuild after this tumultuous first year yet again. So a reminder, we're still kind of in the beginning phases of the Harsin era of him laying the groundwork of where he needs to be. Self-evaluation, as he said, is always important and needs to take place every single year, and it starts at the top and trickles down to everybody within the program. Question number three was about addressing the negativity that is taking place on the recruiting trail in regards to Auburn and what happened during the off season. It's happening. We all know it is. And let me just, if you think it hasn't been happening, what were you doing? Are you living under a rock? I mean, this is what happens every single year. In fact, I've said this a lot. If you are an opposing coach or staff member of another SEC school especially, and you're not taking every advantage that you can get against Auburn, then you're not doing your job. So I don't know why this was such a big revelation for a lot of people, that there was this stuff kind of going on in the background. It's always been happening, but they just had a little bit more ammo this year. Coach Harsin said the best way to combat that is by what they do on the field. Obvious statement, right? But that's really all it amounts to. People can say what they want, but if you show them that it's different on the field, and not just on the field, but off the field, your culture, what you're doing, what you're bringing in, what you're developing, that is what combats that. And that's what they're doing right now. I've already seen a lot of that taking place. Question 4 gets into a lot of the good things that I took away from this press conference, specifically in this one about Coach Ike Hilliard, the wide receiver coach, and his impact on the wide receiver room. You can tell that Coach Harsin is very proud of his staff that he's assembled for this year. Ike Hilliard is definitely one of those. A lot of respect comes up when you mention the name Ike Hilliard. And I knew that coming in when he got here, but I didn't realize how much respect is there from coaches, from players, from peers of himself. This guy is someone I think that we're going to be really happy that we brought in. Now, again, much like we talked about in the last question, you have to prove that on the field. That's what negates any of that negative stuff that's happened in the past. But right now, what Coach Harsin even addressed and talked about is what sticks out to him as a professional, but what sticks out to him in terms of building relationships with the players, and I'm sure that carries over into recruits as well. You have to not just be a coach and not just be a friend, but there's got to be this fine balance between that. And so when I hear Coach Harsin talk about Ike Hilliard, that's what I really take away from it. A guy that's got that balance right. Professionalism, but also being a friend as well. Question 5, one of the things that a lot of people were hoping to hear some things about was the quarterback situation, but specifically this question was Zach Calzada's impact on the quarterback room. High praises from Coach Harsin here, as you expect, and what he contributes to that room overall. Obviously, no indication as to who is going to be the starter this season yet. Fall practice will determine that, but he did mention that it wouldn't surprise him to see multiple people getting a shot in game time at that position. I think that goes to show you the level of competition that is in that room, even outside of Zach Calzada, but he's obviously going to make it an even tougher situation for Coach Harsin, Eric Keesaw, the rest of the staff to make decisions on who should be the signal caller. Question number 6 was around taking advantage of an impressive 5-game home stretch to start off the season in Jordan-Hare Stadium. One thing outside of the actual Auburn day for SEC Media Days that's been a takeaway for me, especially, and a lot of fans, is how other people are talking about Auburn and Jordan-Hare Stadium's environment. It's an impressive thing when you've got the champions, current champions, the Georgia Bulldogs, talking a lot about where they would least like to play or what's been the toughest place to play, and that's Jordan-Hare Stadium. The importance of this cannot be overstated. Auburn has the advantage, and they need to take advantage of that, essentially, is what it comes down to. And Coach Harsin addresses that. And you come into a first-year coach and you say that you're going to be able to appreciate it, but I don't think you appreciate it until year one. And that's what he has now. He said that he saw the impact that our fans have on the game in game 1 alone, if not game 12 with the Iron Bowl. All the way through that season, had a better appreciation for how important the home field advantage is at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Question number 6. There's always that one guy that wants to address the thing that the coach said, I'm done talking about, and they find ways to weasel it in, and you guessed it, it's Joseph Goodman. I know what you're doing, Joseph. You don't fool me. There's 2 good ones out there. I believe it was Joseph Goodman. Not shocking that he's the guy that asked this question, loves being the villain, and asked, was there an attitude change after the inquiry and the issues of the offseason into the state of his program, essentially? Coach Harsin basically said, look, I've already talked about it. There's not really anything else that I need to address. I mean, he kind of talked around it a little bit. You just don't need to address it really anymore at this point. Question number 8 is a big topic of a lot of teams at SEC Media Days, and that's around conference expansion. Not necessarily the future in terms of what could happen, but what we do know has happened. Coach Harsin was asked about his thoughts about what the learning curve will be for Oklahoma and Texas when they arrive in a few years to the SEC. Now, if you haven't known this or forgot about this, he has a lot of history with them, formerly being an assistant coach at Texas, and knows about the cultures, the programs, the traditions that surround the Big 12. What Coach Harsin stressed is obviously a lot about his 1-0 mentality. They need to focus right now on just winning what they have in front of them today. And they're still in the Big 12 conference. But obviously now, as a first-year head coach, got that under his belt in the SEC, he appreciates what they're going to be up against when they come into the conference. I do think, and he even expressed this, that they're somewhat prepared for it. It's going to be different, but these are top-tier programs we're talking about. They'll be just fine. Got an interesting couple of questions here now that I kind of were intrigued by where they were heading with this overall. One was about question 10, I believe. Question 9 was about Pat Dye and him getting the Auburn game, or the Iron Bowl game, to Auburn, Alabama. I kind of understand where they were going with this question. I do appreciate them bringing up that story because it's a great story. It's one of the best moments in Auburn history, that 1980 Iron Bowl, finally having it here on the Plains. Coach Harsin even said, I know about that. I've learned about that now after being here for some time, but I just don't really have anything to add to it other than I understand the importance of the Iron Bowl being in Auburn, especially last year when they had what they were up against and still found a way to be competitive and almost win the game. And then question 10, one of the things that is good about SEC Media Days is not only do you get your local media members there for Auburn, you get some conference-wide media members to have some extra access, but also media members that traditionally cover someone else, another SEC team, come in and get to ask their perspectives as well. Got a beat writer from Arkansas, asked him a little bit about the Arkansas game, and I was a little confused on where he was going with that part of his question because it was a two-parter. Coach Harsin seemed to kind of not be confused, but just talked around that a little bit because it was a game where Auburn pretty much won, not easily, but enough comfort level-wise. Then he was also asked about, what are his thoughts on his two new coordinators, Eric Keesaw and Jeff Schmedding. The first thing that he pointed out was, it's not just that I know these guys. These guys are qualified. And I think a lot of that goes back to what's happened in the past year. There was this idea, and probably some truth to it, that when he was hired on, he was told or suggested, however you like, to bring in certain names, certain types of coaches or tenured coaches to be his coordinators. That obviously happened. How much other people had a hand in that, we'll never know unless we're somebody that was part of that decision-making process. But it's interesting that he points that out because I think he understands the narrative that, yeah, these are guys I have history with, but it doesn't mean that they're not qualified, that they've had their time and they've earned their spot to be the coordinators at this point in Auburn's history. Question 11, this is the one that I actually got most excited about and perked up about, and that was about which two position groups do you think Auburn fans or just everybody in general should pay attention to for Auburn outside of the obvious ones which they pointed out were running backs and the defensive line unit edge rushers position. He pointed out tight ends and defensive backs. Now, it's not a shock that tight ends would be pointed out in that, but it is good to hear that from Coach Harsin. We all know that John Samuel Shanker is going to be the leader there. But you got guys like Brandon Frazier, and then I'll even throw a Landon King in there, even though now he's basically a hybrid tight end slot, a wide receiver guy. I think they're going to be a huge impact, and I think John Samuel Shanker is going to have a huge impact, not just at Auburn, but on the SEC this year. Just a hot take from me, and I love hearing Coach Harsin acknowledge that. The interesting part about that is the defensive backs. It's no secret, Auburn lost one of its best defensive backs it's had in quite some time in Roger McCreary and other talent as well. A lot of talent there still left, but was it going to rise to the occasion and who is it going to be? He didn't go into specifics, but he said, watch that position group. You might be surprised. And finally, a two-parter question in this question 12. He was asked about his off-season traveling around and kind of making those type of events that you see coaches do every year. The importance of this, and I think what you heard him say, was not just I want to call it attitude change like we talked about earlier, but the recognition of the need to be more involved, to be more out in front, kind of like a Bruce Pearl. Even kind of talked about him in this, joked about how much fun it was to be with him on some of these events. I think you saw that a lot in Coach Harsin's self-evaluation. We talked back to question 1, where he talked about needing to change things, needing to always grow. And you saw that with some of the spring events that he did, going around to different groups, Auburn alumni groups, talking to them, obviously recruiting, doing a podcast. Within that part of the question, you kind of heard all of that encompassing there about the importance of doing those things and embracing that side of being part of the Auburn family. The other part of the question was the importance of keeping Alabama and Georgia as part of their SEC schedule, with the potential conference expansion, all that, of things changing in the future. Now, I don't think anybody thinks Auburn and Alabama are going anywhere, and truthfully, we can say the same for Auburn in the Georgia game. But it's obviously a reality that things will have to change with what's coming on. And so this was probably the more future-looking question we had about conference expansion and how it affects SEC schedules. Coach Harsin just addressed that he understands fully the importance of those two games, especially after being here in 1 year. And I didn't hear anything that indicates to me that he's worried about them leaving off of Auburn's schedule in any time soon. So those are all the questions and the things that were said at the press conference. Coach Bryan Harsin at SEC Media Days. Obviously, more happened after and during the fact with players and other interviews that Coach Harsin did, but specifically about that press conference. Would love to know your thoughts about Auburn and SEC Media Days, whether it's something Coach Harsin said here and we talked about or something outside of that. Let's keep that conversation going down below in the comment section. If you enjoyed this type of content, please do help support it by smashing that like button. If you want more from us, be sure to subscribe along with hitting that notification bell so you don't miss any uploads or live streams. There's also ways to help support our content listed in the description of this video, such as becoming a channel member by hitting that join button below or joining the Booster Club at patreon.com/E2C Network. Thank you for being here and checking out the E2C Network, where we cover the whole of the Auburn experience. War Eagle.